In this First Berserker Khazan video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to play Dual Wield, what's worked for me, what my Dual Wield build is. I will just say that Dual Wield feels like it has the highest skill ceiling of all the weapons you can play so far in Khazan. It also potentially has the highest skill floor. But let's get into the stats first before we get into the skills themselves. So the two stats that Dual Blades scale with are Willpower and Strength. Willpower is going to give you 3 damage per point. Strength will give you 2 damage per point. But as usual, they do give you other bonuses as well. Willpower will give you 10 health per point. It'll give you 0.4% stamina recovery, and it'll also give you a decrease in guard stamina consumed when blocking attacks. All these things are really good, particularly stamina recovery. So you're definitely going to want to have quite a few points in willpower when playing Dual Blades. Strength, on the other hand, gives you 10 points as well in health, so that's good. It reduces your weight by 0.5%, which is excellent. And it also reduces the received stamina damage that you take from getting hit from attacks, which is a little bit less useful because obviously you're going to be trying not to get hit. But the weight reduction is actually really good, and it's definitely recommended that you probably put some points here early on in the game in order to keep your agility in the B range. This is below 75%. So depending on what armor sets you're planning on using, you're definitely going to want some points into strength just to make sure your agility is there. You don't want it in the C range. So that alone is worth having, losing a couple points from willpower in order to have. Lowering your agility will increase the rate your stamina recovers and reduce the cost of your dodging. However, vitality is also really good. It not only improves your damage by a little bit, gives you a lot of max health, it will also reduce your weight. So depending on how much vitality you have, you may not need those points in strength early on. And it will also give you resistances to status effects, which is also very good. So definitely recommend having a good amount of vitality when playing Dual Wield, probably like 20 or 30 points early on, and it should definitely be one of your top stats, if not your top stat. And then you have Endurance as well, which gives you max health, it gives you max stamina, increases your attack damage, and increases stamina recovery. This is such a valuable stat for just about any build because stamina recovery is super important. Having stamina is super important for blocking, dodging, attacking, and getting max health is also not bad. So probably early on, your build is going to look something like 20 or 30 vitality, 20 or 30 endurance, 20 or 30 willpower, and then, hopefully you're in the B range of agility. If not, you're going to have some points into strength to get into the B range. So next, let's talk about the skills for Dual Wield. We'll talk about what I consider active skills first. These are the skills that cost spirit in order to activate. These aren't the ones that change your rotation or anything like that. We'll get into that after that. But the first one I want to take a look at is Phantom Sword Dance. So what Phantom Sword Dance does is it gives you a 40-second buff for 2 spirit, that makes it so that when you use Howling Blade or Whirlwind, you're going to have a red phantom that attacks after you each time. It kind of reminds me of Moonlight Stance a little bit, but it looks different and it only triggers on these 2 attacks. So it's really good for people using either Howling Blade or Whirlwind. We use a Whirlwind a ton in this build, which is why we have this. You want to try and keep this buff up all the time in boss fights in order to take advantage of it and get as much damage as possible in using Whirlwind. The next skill we're going to take a look at is Ruthless, and what this skill does is it allows you to attack more and more rapidly by repeatedly hitting the input, and it does cost stamina unlike some other spirit skills, so it's going to take some of your stamina. But what it's going to do is it's going to attack faster and faster until it does a devastating finishing blow, and this skill is just really, really good at getting a lot of burst damage on an enemy or boss that can't really attack you. So for instance, if you stagger a boss after doing a counterattack or something like that, and it just can't get out of a juggled state, then you can unload this in it. Or maybe when it's exhausted before you do a potent blow is a good opportunity to use this. It's very hard to use this when you're not doing them in those states because it has a very long animation and bosses tend to just stand there and let you wail on them unless they're in these states. And the upgrade for this Ruthless Stamina makes the finishing blow like an arcing strike, and you'll also recover half of your stamina if you land the attack on an enemy, which is great because that'll allow you to continue your salvo of blows onto an enemy or boss that's in a staggered state or exhausted. You want to max out this whole tree though. You can use either Wind Piercer or Breeze Dash. I don't typically take both of these. You'll probably take one or the other. These are good for gap closing and instant damage. So you'll kind of just have to decide which one of these you like better from playing around with them, but definitely select one of these 2. Another skill I really like in my build is Gust. You definitely want to max out this full line for more damage that you can get from using Spirit. It's very, very effective against exhausted enemies, just like Ruthless, but it's much faster in the sense that Like, you don't have to have as big of an opening to use this skill more often, unlike Ruthless, where you have to have a big opening. There is an upgrade that makes it into kind of a pseudo parry, which is nice, but I just find that I usually use this for some burst damage versus the pseudo parry. Both Zephyr and Flash Cutter have their own uses, such as Zephyr, getting behind Elamane during her boss fight, or Flash Cutter to thin out groups of enemies early game. But generally speaking, I didn't find them as useful as the other skills, and we already have a lot of skill points here spent in a lot of active skills, so it's hard to justify those points when they could be going into passive skills. So moving on to like the passive skills, if you will, or skills that don't cost spirit that kind of actively change the way that you play Dual Wield. The primary focus with the way that I play Dual Wield is with Whirlwind being the primary source of damage. You're going to try and use Whirlwind as much as possible because frankly, I think it's arguably the best Dual Wield skill in the game. What Whirlwind does is it allows you to follow a swift attack, dodge swift attack, or blowback vengeance with like a triangle or Y press like twice. That will vault you into the air with the first press and then spin attack with the second, which is absolutely deadly. This attack hits repeatedly, and as I mentioned earlier, when you have Phantom Sword Dance buff up, it will hit multiple more times because of that. And if you look at like the Aratra fight, where I'm attacking the legs of Aratra, like I just melt his legs off so fast with this attack. And the other thing that's really great about this attack is that it puts you vertically into the air, allowing you to hit the weak points of a lot of enemies and bosses, which is typically their head. And like some skills just don't have that verticality. And a lot of times too, you can leap over attacks that are horizontally focused, so you just dodge and deal damage simultaneously. Besides Whirlwind, the absolute best, or at least one of the best skills in the Dual Wield skill tree is Deafness paired with Nimble Blitz. Nimble Blitz is the first skill I take in any Dual Wield playthrough, making your dodge attacks hit twice and cover a little bit more damage, as well as adding an actual ranged attack to your kit, which, is the only type of this attack that you'll basically find in the whole game. The way I would describe Deafness is that it basically enhances your dodge to become an attack as well. The combo with these two skills is to do a dodge attack into 2 consecutive strikes from Nimble Blitz, and then spam that over and over since it's a combo baked into your kit rather than an active spirit skill. You can basically just do this at will whenever you don't have spirit. Later on, you'll want to use Deafness Lightfoot to not only increase the distance covered from your basic dodging, but also just increase your deafness damage, so you get more out of it when you're using this. This combo of using Deafness and Nimble Blitz kind of makes light and heavy attacks a bit redundant for Dual Wield, because you're replacing them essentially with a faster, flashier alternative. And this combo, again, has an incredibly high ceiling, as Deafness can actually dodge enemy attacks if you time it properly, and these will count as brink dodges as well, so triggering anything that is triggered from doing brink dodges. This setup is pretty much a must for any Dual Wield player in my opinion, so take out any skill points you have on bonuses to swift attack and heavy attack combos, and instead invest in these two skills and completely replace them doing this kind of pseudo combo. The next important skill is Blowback Vengeance, and what this does is it allows you to do an attack immediately after you Brink Guard that you can follow up instantly with a Whirlwind. So Brink Guard and attack, hit with Blowback Vengeance, right into Whirlwind, allows you to turn a defensive position into an offensive one, and of course if you time this properly, then you can potentially leap over a boss or enemy attack if they do like 2 attacks in a row, Brink Guard the first, leap into the air over the second, and hit them, come down on top of them. There are other obvious passive skills you can take, which I have kind of stayed away from mentioning in my videos because they're just so obvious, like Cold Blood and Disciplined Action for better dodges, as well as Wind/Step for wake-up damage. And honestly, I don't find myself using Potent Blows very much when I'm dual wielding, so I haven't put any points in them as well, and I don't recommend taking Dragon Slayer or Gale unless you want to lean into a Potent Blow playstyle with dual wield, which is not what I'm focusing on in my build. The playstyle with this setup against bosses is to vary your skills a lot, to look amazing while you're doing it and deal huge damage simultaneously. If you look at our no damage videos, you'll see that this weapon is just so much flashier than the Great Sword, and maybe even a little bit flashier than the Spear in terms of its gameplay. So it's all about style points when using the dual weapons, and not only dealing a lot of damage, but looking awesome while doing it. So when a boss isn't staggered, I basically exclusively use Whirlwind and Deafness to get quick damage while stacking up some passives from sets, and sometimes I'll mix in like a Wind Piercer to gap close if I need. You'll also want to be using Blowback Vengeance whenever possible, right after enemies are attacking you for the easy lead up to Whirlwind, or just for a little extra damage. And after each Whirlwind, I recommend disengaging with a tiny ranged attack from Nimble Blitz for a nice little bonus to damage as well. Learning to mix that in is definitely part of this build. It's also worth noting that Whirlwind dodges tons of attacks, as I mentioned before, because of how aerial you are when using Whirlwind. So you can pair this with the iframes from Deafness to theoretically, dodge anything while dealing a lot of damage. When I do a burst counter on a boss or a counterattack on a boss, for basically every single boss, you can fit in a full round of Ruthless, which has, again, the best spirit to damage value for how much it costs. And once I finish with Ruthless, if the boss is still staggered from the burst counter, not exhausted, but, staggered, then I'll lead on with Deafness and Whirlwind spam until I either run out of stamina or the boss seems to be, getting back on its feet out of the staggered state. If I do notice the boss is getting back up, I'll do a backstep ranged attack for a little extra damage while I disengage. Lastly, when I exhaust a boss, I like to use a combination of both my gap closing skill and gust. The gap closing skill, such as Wind Piercer or Breeze Dash, will close the gap after you exhaust an enemy, and they do a little bit extra damage without spending any stamina, which is important because you need that stamina to attack, lengthening the time that you're going to get damage. Then I make sure to do 2 rounds of Gust, which will deal bonus damage since it's against an exhausted enemy, maybe a few Whirlwinds depending on how much time is left, and finally end off with a brutal attack, and after that, 1 more Whirlwind. Depending on how long the enemy is exhausted for, you may want to tweak this a bit to just be Gust or just be Wind Piercer, but this is basically the beefiest combo you're going to get in this time span. Note too that sometimes when I do a burst counter or counter attack on a boss, I'll do the full exhaust combo rather than the Ruthless, since I may be close to getting them exhausted. So let's talk about sets now that we've kind of talked about the playstyle and skills, and I would recommend early on the Executioner set for damage. You will need to put some points into Strength in order to not be in C class of Agility if you're going to use this set. But if you're okay farming, you might want to try and go for the Soul Cleaver set from Blade Phantom since it has a lot of solid stats, and it also has a fantastic 6th bonus. After that, a fantastic early game set is the Fallen Guardian set, which is a Ruthless focus set, which you'll find around mission 4 or so. And since we love Ruthless in this build, that's really, really nice. The 5th bonus gives you a fire status effect for your weapon for 10 seconds after you bring guard, which is just a fantastic increase in damage in my opinion. This specific set bonus was so nice, I almost kept it for the entire game since it just felt great to see an extra 33% damage every attack just from fire. This set also gives some buffs for Ruthless, which includes 35% damage resistance while you're casting the skill, as well as stacking overall damage buff for every single strike of Ruthless that hits the enemy. This damage buff is pretty hard to maintain though, since Ruthless is like a really close range spirit skill, which makes you immobile for a few seconds, but it's still really good to have because you will be using Ruthless periodically during boss fights. You can also take 2 pieces of the Strategist set alongside this, as the Necklace and Ring are free slots and give you a 30% chance for a 50% damage decrease every time you get hit, which is not bad. In my opinion, the only thing that beats the Fallen Guardian set and what I think is the best set in the game is the Beast Slayer set, focused on Whirlwind with the same kind of set bonuses as Fallen Guardian. The most important buffs it gives are firstly a 30% increase in stamina damage with Blowback Vengeance. This is actually much more powerful than it sounds, and it can completely demolish boss stamina bars if they do a combo where they hit you very quickly in succession and you can brink guard all these attacks. It'll just rapidly demolish their stamina bar. The real star of this set though is the overall damage increase for 15 seconds with a max of 20 stacks for every single instance of damage that Whirlwind does. With how often you can be spamming Whirlwind, which is constantly with this build, this is basically a permanent 20% damage buff on your character for extended fights, such as during boss fights where you really need the extra damage. To top it off, you will get a brand new Whirlwind skill, which will make you invulnerable and does some decent damage for 2 spirit. One thing you should note about this skill though is that it only works on tall monsters and bosses, or if you're in a low ceiling area, as you have to kick off a monster's head to use it. This skill isn't super useful all the time, but it's a nice little added bonus alongside the Whirlwind damage percent in this set, and it looks badass as hell. Besides Beast Slayer, you could maybe make an argument for the Unending Tragedy set with its super high damage Crimson Tempest skill and the stamina recovery, but the consistent damage you get from Beast Slayer is better in my opinion. However, once you get the Jar Helmet from Danjin that reduces set bonuses by 1, I highly recommend using the Unending Tragedy Necklace and Ring to get the 3-piece bonus, which grants a stacking stamina recovery rate of 1.5%, increased for 7 seconds after any attack you land with a max of 20 stacks. This paired with the stacking Whirlwind damage gives you a permanent 20% damage boost and a permanent 30% stamina recovery rate, which is absolutely cracked for aggressive Whirlwind playstyles. When it comes to phantoms to use with Dual Wield, Kesha the Unyielding is what I would recommend 99% of the time, pretty much as a staple for most builds out there. This will allow you to stay hyper aggressive with your combos because you're going to have the extra stamina recovery, which is fantastic. An alternative would be Maximilian the Impenetrable if you're fighting a non-mage boss that allows you to brink guard a lot. But it's somewhat inconsistent because not every boss allows you to do this, nor every enemy. So I think Keshta is better overall. And lastly, if you already have tons of stamina regen, depending on what sets you're using, then Wulfric is great for extra damage since we're always in front of the enemy. And the Awakening bonus are relevant for pretty much any dual wield build. So that wraps up my dual wield guide. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. This is the one that you're basically seeing in all of our no damage boss videos that are dual wield focused. So if you like that style of play and you're wondering how to play like that, this is exactly how to do that. Again, if you have further questions about Dual Blade or you have other tips for other players and you want to let them know how you're playing dual wield, feel free to post them in the comments, and if you have questions, I will try and answer them as soon as I can.
We'll be right back.